So this is chapter 16, and what he's going to argue in this chapter is that morality is personal, which is kind of an interesting thing. So most people, think that or many people anyway, think that there's some objective morality that exists. Things are right and wrong in and of themselves. He's going to argue that no, that may not be the case. That you have to have a valuer, a person, a mind in order to have morality. So we'll take a look at what he has to say here and see what he has. So he opens this chapter. He says, Harris and I agree on at least one thing. We both believe that all value, including moral value, requires a valuing subject. That is, somebody to value it, right? That's what he's getting at. Value always requires a mind to do the valuing. So you need a mind in order to do the valuing, is what he's suggesting here, right? That is, a person with a mind. Of course, he says Harris's most pressing problem will be that this close link between morality and consciousness proves too much, he says, and eliminates the possibility of moral realism or objective morality, at least if naturalism is true.
Right. That's a big caveat that he has, especially in this chapter, is sometimes you may be disagreeing with him, but he's always going to kind of hitch his ride sometimes with the added value of if naturalism is true.
Yeah. So if indeed, for instance, value, right, is dependent on a conscious valuer, then he says that, and if naturalism is true, then all value is entirely dependent on human preferences, and therefore it fails to be authoritative in the way that we think morality ought to be, right? We think morality ought to be authoritative in terms of telling us what we ought to do in and of itself. But he says if naturalism is true, it just depends on, and we need a valuer. If those things are the case, then morality is just dependent on human preferences, right. and therefore it's not very authoritative in the way we want it to be.
So
right?
naturalism being true is that nature is all that there is, and so there's no God above or sky below, or however John Lennon decides to do it, and we're hopefully not getting a copyright strike for just that little bit.
Yeah,
and we're saying that once humans evolve into a conscious, empathetic being, you don't really have these types of questions of harmful treatment of animals, to what should we do for the environment, to what should we do to each other, to what should I do against myself,
right.
What should I do with a family versus what should I do for a stranger who lives halfway around the world. These things cannot arise because there's no valuer, no one there to say, I value my family over the stranger halfway around the world, or that I value the environment because my progeny will live on through me and I care what happens to them. We can only have that in a naturalistic universe if we're here and we make it up. We can't pull from the ether of the universe and the twinkling lights say, take care of the earth and stuff like that. So
So he gives us an illustration here to kind of help us to understand what's going on. I don't know, we might want to call it the gold cave illustration.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think this is good.
Right. He asks the question, what makes gold valuable, right? And he says, we do. We make gold valuable, right? We are value makers, and so gold is valuable because we want it and desire it. If you're on a desert island and you're starving to death, and beasts are chasing you, and you stumble into a cave where it's full of, gold, let's say gold coins, well, that's not very valuable. What you need is food, shelter, defense, right, and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so gold is of no value in that type of situation, right? So we make it valuable. We make gold valuable, right?
Yeah, there's an economic problem that again is described as the diamonds for water scenario. So if you have the option of having all the diamonds versus all the water, well, which one's more valuable to you? Well, depends, right? Yeah. If you're out in the desert and you're trudging through and you see that palm tree in the distance, what would you rather find underneath it? a bag full of diamonds or a sack full of water.
Yeah.
And so,
Especially if you have no way of knowing if you're going to get out of the
right.
desert, right?
For the Austrian School of Economics, there's the time preference that's introduced. Well, when am I valuing these things? So I might value the water, or I might understand that diamonds are more rare and I'm comfortable and I can get water because it's more plentiful. So I would value a time preference of having diamonds over water at certain points in time.
Yeah.
So again, what makes gold or the cave valuable, or any of these things, is dependent on the person who's getting chased by the bees, or who's running out of water, or who discovers the gold and has the backpack full of water on his back.
Right. So his point is that something is valuable because some conscious mind or intelligence values it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's the point. And he says that he'll argue that naturalism implies moral subjectivism and moral relativism and moral nihilism and moral skepticism, all of which mean or imply the same thing, that there are no objective, which is human independent moral values, right? All values, he's going to suggest, even moral values, are dependent on valuers. And if naturalism is true, then it's dependent on human valuers, right? Because there's nothing else to depend them on. And if that's the case, then it's relative to persons or a person or whatever, or maybe it doesn't even objectively exist, right? If in terms of being valued.